I'm Sherilyn Skolnicki, and this is Brilliant Balance, the show for working women who are ready to shine. Each week, I bring you ideas, inspiration, and insight on balance, business, and getting it all done gracefully. You ready? Let's be brilliant. This is episode 207, Why Change is So Hard, with my guest, Katy Milkman, author, professor, and behavioral scientist. So I want to ask you, have you ever made a New Year's resolution? I am sure, 100% sure that the answer to that is yes. Or have you ever decided this is the year I'm going to finally start exercising? Or made a declaration maybe on a milestone birthday that you were ready to start saving for retirement or for your children's college fund, only to fall off the proverbial wagon days later. Or worse yet, never actually start, make the declaration and never even get around to starting. Sometimes it feels like that hardly matters, right? Sometimes we make a big, bold declaration and then we're like, oh, here I go again, not really following through. Life just goes on. But sometimes those changes, whether we make them or not, really are the difference between life and death, or high quality life and low quality life. And Dr. Katy Milkman, my guest today, had that insight when she was a PhD student at Harvard. And it really quite literally changed the course of her career. She moved from engineering to behavioral science, armed with the insight that the opponent to changing our behavior is often inside our head, right? It's our forgetfulness or our lack of confidence or our tendency to succumb to temptation that gets in our way. Now, Katy Milkman is the James G. Dinan Professor at the Wharton School, which is at the University of Pennsylvania. She's also the host of Charles Schwab's behavioral economics podcast called Choiceology. And she's the former president of the International Society for Judgment and Decision Making. She is the co-founder and co-director of the Behavior Change for Good initiative. And over the course of her career, she's worked with or advised dozens of organizations on how to spur positive change. Organizations you'd recognize like Google or the U.S. Department of Defense or the American Red Cross or Walmart. These are people who call on her when they need to nudge positive change through their companies or within their organizations. She writes frequently for publications like the New York Times and the Washington Post. And in my interview with her, she unpacks what she's learned and what she's recently shared in her best-selling book, How to Change: The Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. Now, I asked Katy to be on the show because the science that she shares in her book absolutely reinforces so many of the practices that we use in our coaching work with women at Brilliant Balance. We are told so often, you know what, I've tried this 100 times before. I have tried to make this change, but it's finally working. And honestly, I think it's because we're so committed as an organization to getting underneath why someone resists change, right? What patterns get in her way? You've heard me call this, let's double click on that and see what's underneath it. Right? What can we do to sort of nudge the obstacle out of the way so that our client can succeed? And you'll hear Katy talk about this exact process in our interview. Y'all, she was so fun to have on the show. I really want you to explore her book. If you are a reader and you are somebody who is going to go deep into this, How to Change is a truly excellent book. My copy is marked up from end to end. So let's get into it with Katy. Well, Katy, welcome to the show. We've been catching up here a little bit before we went on air, and it has been so fun. So I'm so looking forward to this interview.
I am looking forward to it as well. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start here. You are a working mom, just like a lot of our listeners. And it's always great to get a bit of a glimpse behind the scenes. Like, what does life really look like? So tell us what today looks like in your life.
Oh my gosh, today was a little crazy. So my son is at kindergarten. He's just started. It's his third day. And he is now in a kindergarten that's a bit of a drive for us, which is new. So we did a morning commute that was longer than it should have been. We haven't optimized the commute yet. It took about an hour and a half round trip, which is crazy. The drop-off line is still madness. We haven't figured out where the traffic is light. So that's how I started my day, with a really, getting the kid out the door on time, into the car, drop off, back. And then it's 9 a.m. And I sat down and started working on a manuscript revision with a doctoral student. So, writing, about an hour of that. Then I went into a Zoom call with one of my close collaborators, Angela Duckworth. If any of you have read Grit, she's an amazing academic and author and human. And we co-direct a research center together. And we have a weekly check-in call that's sort of like what's on our minds. And we started with some details about a study. Then we decided we'd both switch from Zoom to phone. We both went and exercised while we finished brainstorming about some new ideas. And then I went into another meeting with a doctoral student and another collaborator, again, this time Zoom, where we were plotting projects. So actually Fridays are my best days because I try to preserve them mostly for ideating, which is my favorite part of my job. So this is a really good day. I'm doing this podcast and one other podcast, but the rest of my day is clear and I will be either writing or ideating. Most days are meetings back to back. So that's what my Friday looks like. It's pretty good actually, except for the commute.
And then what are you going to do for fun? How does the afternoon and evening go?
Well, depends how you define fun. I define my job as fun. So actually I love things like this. This is a fun conversation, getting to, talk to different people. We kibitzed about my amazing dean, so I would say everything I've done so far today has been pretty fun. And my afternoon, I'm going to get to do more writing and thinking, which is really fun. And then my son will come home around 5:30. We'll have family dinner, sort of relax a little bit before we go into his bedtime routine. And then I'll probably get to read a good book after he gets to bed. And I'll read a book with him, which is always fun. We're in the Beverly Cleary phase right now.
Oh, yeah.
Just so good. I love Beverly Cleary. I feel like she just passed away at age 105, I think, in March. And I'm like, I wish that we had started reading these slightly earlier so I could have written her a gratitude letter before she died, because, oh my gosh, her books are just so great.
Or have your son write. When I was little, my mom was a kindergarten teacher her whole life, but she used to have me write letters to authors that I liked when I was a little kid. And it was amazing when they wrote back. So I went through this Carolyn Haywood phase, she's really an older author and her books were a little antiquated even when I was growing up. But I remember just treasuring getting this response from Carolyn Haywood, who wrote like B is for Betsy. And they're a little more antiquated than Beverly Cleary, but loved them when I was a kid. That's so fun.
So fun.
Yeah.
So fun. I love that time.
Not surprising that you are a reader. I am 0% surprised. So that's awesome. You can think for the end give us a good reco at the end of our interview. So I want to ground our listeners in behavioral science. You are a behavioral scientist by trade, and I'm not sure everyone will know exactly what that is. So tell us a little bit about the field.
Yeah, well, the field is a fun in-between field, which is part of why I love it. And there's no two behavioral scientists you could find who are exactly alike, honestly. We're all some odd amalgamation of economics and psychology, maybe a little bit of sociology. I have a computer science background, but we're people who are interested in studying the decisions that other people make. And why did you make that choice? What's going on? And can I influence you potentially to make better choices? That's what a behavioral scientist obsesses over, is understanding the decision processes of other people and how to improve them, ideally, but from all different angles. So it's a really multidisciplinary field. And I love that the term behavioral science has come into vogue because my background is as an engineer. I don't have training in psychology or economics, except from, the occasional course that I took in those areas, but I don't have any degrees in them. And it's nice because behavioral science encapsulates all of us, all of the messy people who've come to study this topic.
Mm-hmm. And, when you look at like STEM and all the emphasis on STEM, I have a teenage daughter and man, it is a STEM world that they are great. I don't think this is an area of STEM that gets as much play because it's very often rooted in sort of hard sciences. Would you categorize it as part of STEM or would you put it on the side?
That's I'm technically the behavioral economics concentration advisor at Wharton for the undergraduates, and I literally yesterday was having an email exchange to try to figure out if we are classified as a STEM discipline because it matters for students' visa status, and we couldn't figure it out. And then we went to this big list, and we found behavioral science is listed as a STEM. The government says it is.
You are sanctioned.
We're sanctioned. It's officially sanctioned as STEM. I learned yesterday.
Well,
So,
I really do think that's fascinating because anyone listening who has a daughter who maybe feels not drawn to, like, I'm calling them hard sciences, like chemistry, physics, computer science, like things that have a hard edge, is kind of how I classify those. If they're more interested in people and behavior, it is sort of like, oh, do I fit into this world? But these intersections to me are so interesting. And, there is science behind it. Like my daughter's science fair projects were rooted in behavioral science every time she's done it. So I think it's a fascinating field.
Yes, there's lots of quantitative, like room for people who are into numbers and data and statistics. We use like massive amounts of it, just as much as I did when I was frankly studying computer science, if not more. But we apply it to try to understand, the peculiar things people do instead of the peculiar things particles do or the peculiar things computers do. My husband's a physicist, by the way. And so, and at the University of Pennsylvania with me. And I think that's an amazing field too. But I don't wake up in the middle of the night wondering about what a particle is going to do. I do wake up wondering about how I could help people save more for retirement or be prepared for an emergency or make sure that they aren't going to end up in an emergency room unnecessarily because they've taken care of their health. Those are the things that I want to fix in the world. Yes. And so behavioral science lets you do that, but using all the same quantitative tools that you could apply to physics problems.
Okay, I want to pick up that thread because you said those are the problems I want to fix in the world. And something we talk about a lot in Brilliant Balance is people are navigating their way toward purpose or meaning or their calling is, what are the problems that you want to solve? And I think we're going to talk a lot today about your book, How to Change. What you're really looking at is how do we solve these problems using behavioral change? If there are problems you see in the world and you talk at the beginning of your book about an experience you had where you were like, wow, if I could throw my shoulder to that wheel and solve that problem, that would bring a lot of meaning to my work. Can you tell us that story?
Yes, I love that you asked. This is sort of my pivot point in life because I was interested in behavioral science kind of like casually, I'll say, it became my career, but I just thought, oh, this stuff is interesting. It's so interesting and weird that people behave in these strange ways that we can quantify it. That's kind of fun. So that was how I started. And then I was successful enough that I ended up with an assistant professorship at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And we have this amazing medical school down the street. And there were a bunch of folks interested in behavioral science and medicine there, started hanging out, wandering into some of their research seminars. And one day I was in a presentation by a doctor who's thinking about behavior change. And she put up this graph on a slide. And the graph showed the percentage of premature deaths in the United States that are caused by different things. So, some premature deaths are due to, bad luck with genetics. Some of them are due to accidents, right? There's all these different causes of premature death. What blew my mind is that the largest wedge in that graph was premature deaths that are caused by decisions that we could change. 40% of premature deaths are caused by decisions we could change. So these are decisions about things like what we eat, what we drink, whether or not we're physically active, if we buckle our seatbelt when we get into a car and drive safely, whether we smoke. Those decisions add up so much more than I had ever appreciated. I would have guessed maybe 5% of premature deaths. 40% blew my mind. And so that was a major turning point in my life because I was already studying decision making. I was already sort of interested in, can we improve things? And all of a sudden I realized if I focus all my attention on behavior change and really apply myself to this problem, there's this enormous social value that could be created. And it was obvious to me also that if this is true in the domain of health, I was also interested in financial decisions and educational outcomes. It was sort of obvious that if the accumulation is so large in this walk of life, almost certainly the accumulation is larger than I appreciate when it comes to our finances, when it comes to our happiness, when it comes to our career outcomes. And so, why not try to understand this solution set and make a dent in all of those problems? So that's when I became fascinated and focused on behavior change for good, trying to make positive behavior change in people's lives.
And it's such a compelling before and after. Like you had this massive aha moment, this stroke of insight of like, okay, this is it. If I can direct my research, my work toward this, I can actually make a dent in this universal problem that's big, right? And meaningful. I love that. And so much of that is about how do we get people to change their behavior? So, I work in this world of everybody wants to change. We all want our lives to move up and to the right. We want to be better tomorrow than we are today. And I'm in that camp for sure. That's how I'm wired. And yet we know that so many of the changes we want to make, we struggle to actually make. And you wrote the book on this, like the science of getting from where you are to where you want to be. So I want to talk about the things that you share in this book without giving the whole book away, because honestly, I want people to get the book. The book is fantastic. And if you're listening today and you're into this stuff and we kind of whet your appetite with the few that we're going to cover, get the book. We're going to link it in the show notes. It's called How to Change. And it is, my copy is marked up everywhere. It's just hearts and stars and underlines and notes in the margin. So when I read a book in hard copy, I really want this one forever instead of on my Kindle. You talk about essentially the obstacles to change. Like what are some things that get in our way when we want to change? And I want to highlight 3 of them today and unpack them a little bit. Okay. The first one that I found fascinating was just getting started. Right? When do we start? And what is sort of the environment that makes us receptive to embarking on a period of change? And you found there actually are better times to change, but they aren't necessarily as hard to find as one might think. So what are some good times to establish a new habit? What did you learn about that?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. This is one of my favorite topics that I've ever studied. Actually, the origin story for this is kind of fun too. I was giving a talk at Google to a bunch of their HR leaders about behavior change and different tools that worked. And I got this great question. One of them basically raised their hand and said, okay, Katy, we want to use those tools, but when should we use them? When are people actually receptive to change? And that was also an aha moment because I was like, wow, we don't know. I don't think there is an answer. I can't look into sort of the academic literature and come up with one. But obviously, there are moments when we're more motivated and less. Just introspecting, it's so obvious. And looking around me, sometimes, right, New Year's is the most obvious one. The whole world is lined up talking about their New Year's resolutions. 40% of Americans are setting goals. It's an incredible thing that we have these moments when everyone's ready to change, and then moments when no one is ready to change too. And so can we actually document and understand what's going on? When do those arise? It's probably not just New Year's. And is there something systematic? And can we start capitalizing on that better? So I started talking to my then doctoral student, Heng-Chen Dai, who's a professor at UCLA, and Jason Reese, who is a senior fellow at Wharton. And they were just as excited as I was about the potential to crack this nut. And we started talking about what is it about New Year's that we thought probably made it special and caused, beyond the fact that now it's like a social activity and it's, we're all, CNN tells us to set our resolutions. Everybody asks you.
New year, new you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But like, where did that fundamentally come from? Because it came from somewhere. And what we realized is there's something pretty special that happens at this boundary point, right? As you turn the page on your calendar and it becomes January 1, it's no longer December, it's a new year, you can say like, well, okay, I feel disconnected from the old me and the old year. That's a past self that I can discard. And I can say, I failed to quit smoking, or I failed to become a better parent or a better mentor last year the way I intended to. But that was the old me, and the old me is gone. Out with the old, in with the new, and the new me can do it. So we have this ability to disconnect and feel greater optimism because we have a sense that there's a new beginning and a clean slate that comes with this passage of time. And what we realized is actually there's a lot of moments in our life that give us that sense of a new beginning. It's not just New Year's, so that's a remarkable one. But even the start of a new week, the celebration of a birthday, particularly, big birthdays, moving to a new community, a new job at work, all of these moments can feel like new beginnings. Starting a new semester, if you're in school, they feel like fresh starts. And so we started digging into data to look and see, do we see evidence that at these other fresh start, new beginning type moments that seem to us like they would have the same psychological features, that people are more engaged with goal setting? And we found in data set after data set there was an uptick in engagement in these sort of goal-directed behaviors. So when we looked at gym attendance, when we look at when people search for the term diet on Google, when we looked at data from a popular goal-setting website, just looking at when the customers of this website come and set their goals, we see, of course, the huge uptick at New Year's, but also we see upticks at the start of a new week, a new month, the celebration of holidays, particularly holidays that we associate with fresh starts. So think more Labor Day and less Valentine's Day as sort of fresh starty. And then birthdays show the same pattern. So we're seeing this consistency, and that got us really excited that this is happening naturally. And then we started doing some research on whether you could actually take advantage of this and sort of nudge people. Here's a moment, capitalize on it. And we ran a series of studies where we would just highlight for people a date, call it out that they might not have noticed, like the start of spring or a birthday, and say, here's an opportunity. Would you like to start saving for retirement, for instance?
Yes.
Or would you like to start pursuing a goal and getting reminders from us? And when we highlight the very same date and just label it as something that highlights it's a fresh start, we see an increase in people's interest in beginning new things. So we were able to increase savings in a retirement savings program by about 30% over a 9-month period by just inviting some people to start saving at a fresh start moment and labeling it as such, compared to inviting others to start at exactly the same time, but not mentioning this is just your birthday. We're just saying like, do you want to start saving in 3 months versus do you want to start saving after your next birthday, which happens to be in 3 months, by the way.
I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And not just in this study, because this book is full of the research to substantiate these ideas. Like that's what really, to me, sets this work apart, is it's not just, oh yeah, we all kind of know this probably works. It's why it works. And then the testing behind what's the experimentation we did? What is the study that we did? That one was particularly fascinating around the way you described the exact same date moving their behavior. If it was language that indicated this is, after your next work anniversary, which is, by the way, coming up in 3 months, versus on this date 3 months from now, which doesn't mean anything to them, that actually changed the behavior. So I think there's so much of that throughout the book. And I could sit with you all day listening to these stories for sure. Like I love that one. So fresh starts or moments that imply a fresh start that can be fabricated, or like sort of nudged to use your word in that direction, really work. And the only time it backfires, and I've seen this happen in people around me's lives and maybe in my own, is if you're on a roll already and then there's a fresh start moment, it can sort of go the other way. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing this up, because this is, I think, a really important thing to be aware of as well. So most of the time in life, unfortunately, we could use a little fresh start to kickstart change. Often it's helpful, especially if we have an unmet goal and we've been sort of sitting on it, or we haven't been getting to the gym as regularly. So those fresh starts can be really helpful when we need a little kick in the pants. But a fresh start is disruptive if you've got something good going. And one of my favorite studies of this, which was done by Heng-Chen Dai, my former student who I mentioned a moment ago, was actually looking at professional baseball players and looking at when they get traded in the middle of a season and comparing how those trades affect players in two ways. First of all, she sort of split players into above average and below average type performers. So she's looking at like people who are having a great season, people who are having a not so great season. So her big question was, are there differences in the benefits of getting moved to a new team and sort of having a fresh start? Of course, a trade is sort of a big disruption. And she needed to be able to say, how do I equalize that? It turns out sometimes when you get traded, you're traded to a team in the same league, and it's actually less disruptive. So all of your season to date statistics stay with you, even though you're moving to a new community and there's some degree of a fresh start. It's not as strong as when you're traded across leagues, because then, your batting average, all of your season to date statistics reset. So she actually said, this will be a really nice comparison. I'm going to look at players who get traded across leagues versus within leagues. They're both getting a fresh start, but one is getting a bigger start than the other. And let's see if there's a difference in the way they respond to that. And she looked specifically at above, see these performers who are doing really well and the ones who are doing really poorly. And what she sees is that when you get a sort of bigger, fresh start, the people who are having a rough season benefit more. Everybody sort of improves a little bit, but the ones who get this fresh start, they benefit more, but it's exactly the opposite for the players who are having a great season to date. So this trade disrupts their momentum and actually ends up hurting them when they're traded across leagues. That's more harmful than when they're traded between leagues. Yeah. And it's so intuitive, but I think a really nice demonstration. She has other research on this as well, but I particularly love that study, just highlighting fresh starts can be harmful when things are going well. And you want to look out for them.
Yeah.
It's a disruption, right? Mm-hmm. Disruption is exactly what you need when things are going poorly. And it's exactly what you don't need. So if you're managing or coaching, I think the implications are super clear. Or teaching, right? The kids or the people on your team who are struggling, give them a fresh start as soon as you can. Make resets maybe frequent so that they can sort of, if they have an off day, you can get back in your groove and throw away the bad history and not let that bog you down. But people who are doing well, you don't want to disrupt them. You don't want to say, okay, it's a new month. You know,
it's like, this is working. Why would we throw it out? And yet we get a little cocky on like, things are going pretty well. I'm just like, I don't need, and then that inflection point comes. And then the next thing we know,
and you lose your momentum. Exactly.
Yes, you lose your momentum.
Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself saying, I just need a minute to breathe? While the whole idea of meditation can sound totally intimidating, I've found that stepping away from the chaos of life, even just for a few minutes, is incredibly restorative. So if you're short on time, but could use a few moments of peace right about now, listen to my 5-minute meditation for working moms. It'll help you clear your head and come back to your day feeling centered and refreshed. Head over to brilliant-balance.com/breathe. Press play and settle in for a few mini moments of peace right now. I'm going to shift us to the second one. So the second one, everyone will sort of scrunch their shoulders up at. It's called laziness, right? Which is our tendency. No one likes to think of herself as lazy.
I know. I struggled with naming that chapter, laziness, by the way.
It's true, right? We're also drawn to the path of least resistance, right? We're going to, left to our own devices, sort of take the easiest path. And you found a really fascinating way that instead of that being a negative, we can actually make it work for us instead of against us. So tell us about defaults.
Yes. And I should also say, this is really others who've done this work, and I am just a huge admirer of it and get to share it in my book. So there is absolutely fascinating work showing that whatever option is selected for us without us taking any action, what will happen naturally when we do nothing, ends up being incredibly sticky. So let me give you some examples. When you get a new computer and you open it up and there's, a default browser installed, like whether it's Firefox or Chrome or Internet Explorer, has a huge impact on what browser you end up using, whatever the background is, whatever the font size is. Those are the defaults that come with it. And life is actually pretty full of defaults. Often we don't notice it. We maybe notice it a little bit more with our computers than with other things. But, you walk into a coffee shop, you order a beverage, there's some defaults. Do they put cream in it? Or does it half and half? Is it 2% milk? And you're really likely, some of us are aficionados and we'll be like, I want it like this. But most of us just accept it as it comes. And you maybe drink that every day and it changes how many calories you consume. There's other more meaningful defaults when you join an employer. For instance, some employers will automatically enroll you in their retirement savings program, often a 401k. So you don't have to do anything. You can opt out. There's normally a website you can go to or a number you can call to say, like, please don't take a portion of all my paychecks and shove it into that retirement savings account. But you have to do something to opt out. It's normally pretty trivial, but you have to do something. And some employers do it the other way. You have to opt in. So they don't start sending money out of every paycheck to a retirement account. So there's some really fascinating research that was done about 20 years ago by Bridget Madrian, who is now the dean at Brigham Young University's Marriott School of Business, and Dennis Shia, who was working at, I believe, the company that did this. This company made a small change. They went from having people enrolled only if they opted in to their 401k plan to one day they just switched it and said, we'll opt you in automatically. And they looked at employees who joined the company in the month before and the month after this change. Nothing else changed at the employer. It was just sort of like a little paperwork flip. 40% more people started saving for retirement when they made this change to the paperwork that you fill out on day one, so that you have to opt out as opposed to opting in. Huge change, right? Giant implications for people's financial security. So this is an example of a default that takes the path of least resistance and sets it up to be what's best for you. And you can do this for yourself or for people you care about, right? So in your own life, you can think about like, what are the foods in the pantry? Those are your default snacks, right? It's harder to go and get something else to eat than whatever's on hand. So whatever you make accessible in your home is essentially a default you're setting for yourself. You can think about choosing your default browser. Is it social media? Is it, a social media website that maybe you wish you were spending less time on? Or is it like the New York Times so that you can get more news, or the Wall Street Journal, so you're learning every time you log in? So all of these little decisions actually seem to accumulate and matter a lot because we're so wired to take the path of least resistance. Be lazy. Yeah. Yes. So we can, once we know that about ourselves, we can use it as a tool.
And if we don't look at it as shameful, we look at it as powerful, that actually the more we reset our own default. So there's this moment of consciousness that you have to harness to say, okay, wait, my default is not serving me. Yes, I need right? So, maybe putting those chips right at eye level is not the thing I need at eye level. I need this reminder of what's in front of me. But once I reset my default, boy, this is going to get a whole lot easier because now I have sort of inertia on my side. So I love that one. And I would challenge anyone listening to just find one. Just think about one place where you can reset a default in your life that may get you. I'll tell you one, the time your alarm goes off. How many people have a stressed out morning because their alarm goes off 15 or 20 minutes later than it really needs to smooth out that morning, but they've set it at that time forever and haven't re-engineered the morning around a new time. So you could think of hundreds of these in your own lives as you're listening. Third one I want to cover today is impulsivity. So I think we'd probably all head nod along that most people prefer short-term gratification over long-term rewards. It's human nature, right? To kind of want things right now. But so many of the really positive changes that we are looking for in our lives, like saving or eating well or exercising, require us to do things that we wouldn't necessarily choose in the short term to get what we want over time, right? And you found some really terrific ways to help here. So can you talk about temptation bundling first? Because I have used this one and I love this. I didn't have a name for it.
This is one that a lot of people have independently discovered. And I think partly because it's so handy.
Yes.
And what we did in our work was sort of quantify its benefits and name it so that now you can, once you have a label for it, you can start actually strategically trying to do it more than just the one place you found. So
yes.
What I do, let me give you my personal example of temptation bundling and I'll sort of extrapolate from there. And I figured this out as a graduate student. I was stressed out. I wasn't exercising enough. I was tired at the end of a long day in graduate school. I'd come home. All I needed to do at that point was my homework or go to the gym. Those were the two things that would benefit me. And I had no energy to do either. All I wanted to do was curl up on the couch and, binge watch lowbrow TV or read a good novel to just reduce the stress of the day. I could not energize myself to do the other things that needed to happen. And this was bad. It was bad for my mental health. It was bad for my productivity on my homework assignments. Everything was bad about it. And I had this realization. I thought, what if I only let myself indulge with that entertainment while I'm exercising? Maybe that would actually motivate me to go to the gym and I'd waste less time because as soon as the exercise is over, I'm constrained. I've gotten that in, I've gotten my fix, and now I'm going to go home and get my work done. And it was like magic, truly. My grades improved. Everything went better because I'd come home at the end of the long day, crave a trip to the gym to find out what happened latest. I did it actually with audiobooks because I found TV shows were too much for sensory input for me, but lots of people I've learned do it with TV shows. So I was binge listening to Harry Potter and the Alex Cross series by James Patterson. I'd leave on a cliffhanger, desperate to get back after classes, rush to the gym. The workout is so great because I'm completely engrossed in this story. It flies by. It used to be a pain. I used to dread it. I enjoy my workout. I go home and now I've gotten, my exercise fix, my entertainment out of the way, and I'm ready to totally focus on my work. It was amazing. So I realized okay, this is a thing I can do strategically. I'm making it fun. I'm making it instantly gratifying to do a thing that's good for me that used to feel like a chore. And I'm wasting less time doing things that are instantly gratifying and tempting and maybe aren't good, good for me in the long run to do too much of. And I was like, where else can I use this in life? I started only scheduling meetings with difficult students at my favorite restaurants that weren't so healthy, that I should visit rarely. So now I'm looking forward to those meetings and scheduling some more of them, but also maybe not eating at that restaurant every day.
So Katy, it's almost, if I paraphrase this one, it's, I only get to do this thing I like that's not very good for me, maybe, or like not as good for me.
Yep.
When I'm also doing, or right after I've done this thing that's good for me. So sort of putting them together as a package, like this is the good and this is the maybe more indulgent, not so good. And because they're bundled, I'm sort of bridling the frequency of the not so good.
I'm bridling the frequency and I'm harnessing the temptation of the instantly gratifying thing to bring
get me to do
the chore that's good for me in the long run, but just doesn't have that hit of satisfaction in the moment that I need to get me to do it. So exactly, it's like self-bribery,
yes,
essentially.
Yes.
But one of the nicest things happens, and this is really nerdy, but one of the nicest things happens when it's like what an economist would call when there are complementarities, meaning like peanut butter and jelly are complements. They're better together. So if you can find things to combine where actually both of those things become more delightful when you do them simultaneously, that's a lot better than a pure bribe, right? Like you could pay yourself for like, I'm going to give myself $1 that I get to spend on ice cream every time I go to the gym. And maybe that'll help because now the gym, like there's some bonus, but it's not nearly as good as actually making the experience of exercising more fun by combining it with something else. Right. So that's the ideal temptation bundle is you've truly changed the nature of the activity that used to be a bore by combining it with something that's a treat.
I like that nuance. I'm going to have to chew on that one for a while, but I could geek out on how those bundles can be made even sweeter because it comes up a lot in coaching, right? When women are trying to change, which is our world we're living in day in and day out, change habits, change behaviors, get themselves to do things that they know advance their lives toward their potential, but might be arduous in the short term. What I'm hearing now is how do we make that even more enjoyable by tacking something or weaving something into the experience that might be truly already enjoyable. Love it.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be entertainment or food. It can also be like social, right? So like, what if you, go on walks around the neighborhood with a friend and that's how you get your exercise in. Now,
or you only burn that amazing Joe Malone candle while you're writing, right? Like you can't have that set unless you're writing at the same time. Talking to myself. Okay. So finally, and again, there are 7 of these in the book. We've just covered 3. So many more that I want everybody to sort of explore. And each of them is unpacked in far more detail than we're able to do in this episode. But you close the book with how we change for good. And I think this is, first of all, is well titled. Love, nice little Wicked reference there. But also, the notion of sustainability of change. We go through all this effort to create change. And it doesn't always stick, and that's disappointing. So you have some guidance on how to make change stick. Can you share a couple thoughts on that?
Yeah, this also came from an interaction with a medical doctor who I was talking with about a study result that I was really disappointed in. We'd done this big study that had yielded great benefits for people while they were enrolled. So we had like a month-long program we developed and it was working. And then the program ended and everybody basically fell off the wagon. Like they went back to where they'd been. And I was so disappointed because what I'd really wanted was to change people in a lasting way. And I had this conversation with this colleague who's a medical doctor, and I was expressing my dismay and saying, why is this so hard? Why didn't it work? And he looked at me and he said, look, when we diagnose someone with diabetes, we don't put them on insulin for a month, expect it to cure them, and then take them off. There are some diagnoses that are sort of chronic conditions. We recognize that we have to treat it continually because we can't make the underlying
condition,
physiology and condition. We can't make it just go away. It's there. We can treat it. And he was like, why do we think behavior change is any different? All these barriers to change, all the things that we know are standing in the way, they aren't things that are going to be shed a month later. They're always with you. So why wouldn't we treat these challenges to, figure out how to motivate myself to achieve more at work, to, and hit my deadlines, to exercise regularly, to save regularly, to not lose my temper with my kid regularly. Why don't we treat those as a chronic challenge and recognize we shouldn't give someone a 1-month program and expect it to work. We need to offer tools that can be used forever.
Yes.
just like we'd put a diabetic on an insulin regimen forever. And for me, that was like a really important moment because I was feeling disheartened by the fact that we weren't finding things that you could offer in the short term and take away. And then like magically they'd take people forward forever and change them forever. But we were seeing things that if you invested in them and for even years on end, you continued to see the same benefits. And that's what I've come to realize is like, I shouldn't be looking for that silver bullet that has, one and done quick fix feature. Change isn't going to be a quick fix, but that doesn't have to be bad news. Something like temptation bundling, it's not a chore to have to do that for the rest of my life.
Right.
I love listening to Harry Potter at the gym. I always will. So I think it can feel overwhelming to think about it that way. We want to be able to tell ourselves, I just have to put in effort for a short time period and then I'll be able to change forever. But I think another way of saying is the startup costs are heavier to figuring out what works for you, but then sticking with it actually isn't so hard. But that is what you'll need to do. It isn't going to be a quick, I figured it out. I hacked it for a little while and then I expect it to magically last.
There's mechanisms to reinforce, like, I now know that this behavior works. I'm getting the intended result. How do I sustain the behavior? Is that long tail? So there's this period of intense change of like, I'm going through change management, high cognitive load. How am I going to manage all this? But then the long tail is, what's my environment? What are my reward structures? What is my, who's
social support?
Yes. So that I can sustain these behaviors and as a lifestyle. Yeah.
Exactly.
Love it. Oh, I could do this all day. So this is so helpful. I wanted people to know where they can find your work online. What's the best URL?
The best place to find me is at my website, which is Katy with a Y, just like Katy Perry. Thank you to her for teaching people. There's another spelling. Katy with a Y, milkman.com.
Awesome. I'm going to wrap us up with a quick speed round. This is like lightning round. Okay. We do this with all of our guests. First question. What makes you feel brilliant?
Oh, being around amazing people who I get to talk to about ideas that, your game goes up when you're around great people and interacting with them. I love that.
What's your favorite time-saving or productivity hack?
Bundling. I'm a big bundle, not just temptations, but other things too. Like I'm never on a walk when I'm not taking a call, even commuting between meetings, there's a conversation, something productive happening. So layering, like anytime there could be two things happening, as long as it's not taking away from the quality, but normally it isn't. I'm doing two things.
What have you learned to say no to?
Oh, so many things. I have a spreadsheet of the things that I say no to because I get so many of the same kinds of asks over and over again. And I have to have rules and boundary conditions. I don't do any consulting. That's one thing, for example. I don't find joy from that. I really like owning the projects I work on. So no to all consulting. And I have lots of boundary conditions like that around all the kinds of asks I get at a high frequency.
Makes it easier to make decisions. What's one dream you're chasing these days?
I mean, I'm still chasing the dream of behavior change. I'm not done with that one, right? I wrote a book because I felt like I knew enough that I could really help, but there's so much more to learn. And I hope that if in 20 years I were to revisit the book, I'd have many more than 7 chapters to write. So I'm still chasing the dream of making it easier and easier to help people achieve their goals and finding the scientific solutions to that.
Awesome. This is a fun one. What's the song that you turn on when you need to get in the zone?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good question. I'm trying to think of there's so many different ones. Probably Taylor Swift, 22? Is it 22?
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one.
That's probably, although I put on a lot of her albums. So I'm like, I'm not sure that's the
complete discography. Yes. Yes.
Different ones, different moments.
Awesome. Katy, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us today. I know everyone listening is taking something away that they can really apply. So thank you for your time and your investment in us and for doing this work in the world.
Thank you so much. This was a really fun conversation. Thank you for asking great questions.
Okay. Wasn't she awesome? You can hear the energy in my voice. I had so much fun talking with her. I really could do it all day. I love how she says that what makes her feel brilliant is having conversations with brilliant people. And boy, does she get to do that in her work on the regular. So I hope you loved listening in to her insights. I can promise you, if you liked this interview, you will love her book. The book is called How to Change: The Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. You can get it anywhere that you buy your books. If you're anything like me, your copy will be completely marked up by the time you are finished reading it. So that is all for today. Thank you for joining me, and come back next week for a brand new episode of the show. Till next time, my friends, let's be brilliant.
This is the podcastfactory.com.